All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. This is an amazing turnout. I'm so excited to see so many people here. I am Rob Zucchero. I am the Community Development Director for the city of Louisville. Been with the city for about 7 years. And we are kicking off a really major study for the city, which is our housing plan. This is the first time the city's ever conducted a formal housing plan such as this. And this is also leading up to a comprehensive plan update for the city as well. These are really big planning efforts that are really gonna kind of dictate the policy and the direction that the city wants to go over the next 10 years. So having everybody here in the room and getting this input is vital to these planning processes. They take a long time. There's a lot of effort. There's a lot of discussion, a lot of compromise. We need everybody's ideas because we need to know what your vision is for the community as the community members. So thank you again for being here. Thank you so much. This housing plan is being funded partially by a grant from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. They are at the state level, they're being very supportive of affordable housing right now and housing in general. We were going to kick this off for the Marshall Fire and kind of slowed everything down, but we're really glad to get to it. The grant program is called Innovative Housing Grant Program. So we've got DOLA and IHOP. They love their acronyms at the state. And it is to promote innovative solutions to the development of affordable housing. Our housing plan is about affordable housing for sure. You'll see in our consultant's presentation, affordability has been and is a growing issue in the community. And hopefully we can come up with some policies to help. But it's also about housing for the whole community as well. Workforce housing, aging in place. There's so many things that we need to try to address with our housing plan. So we have been fortunate enough to hire 2 consulting firms that are helping us with this plan. Echo Northwest and Logan Simpson are our consultants, and I'll have them introduce themselves here in just a moment. You want to go to the next slide? Sorry, that's okay.
Damn.
So I just wanted to mention again the timing of everything that we're doing here. So this housing plan is something that we're trying to complete hopefully by the end of this year. Maybe it goes into next year, but we're starting now. And what we're doing now is called a needs assessment. So we're really trying to figure out what the community needs. Development of strategies and policies are later. Tyler's going to be talking about that. But I really want to emphasize the comprehensive plan update. Whatever policies come out of the housing plan are going to have to align with the comprehensive plan. That's a plan for the city that talks about infrastructure and land uses and character of the community and what type of recreational resources and open space and trail, like how do we make that all work together? So we're going to be kicking that project off this year. That's going to go late into 2024 as far as that adoption. So if you're, we're going to have many opportunities. This isn't the only opportunity to talk about your vision for the city and housing policy. This is just the first opportunity. There'll be many more in person as well as surveys and all of that. So one more slide, I think. Yeah, so this, we'll just skip that one, go to the next one. So I just want to talk a little bit about the comprehensive plan. Again, we're doing the needs assessment. When we get to that comprehensive plan stage, we just really want to make sure that our housing and what comes out of this plan is really meeting the community character as well. I know that's a big issue. I've been here 7 years. I've talked to a lot of folks. We really need to balance how the community is going to change over the next year with character issues too. If we're going to be building new housing or transforming properties for housing, community character is going to be important. The city and the city council is very interested in DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion, and also sustainability. So whatever housing goals we come up with really need to match well with all of those goals. Business growth is also important to the city. Businesses, we're hearing a lot from businesses about their housing as well. And then I really want to emphasize providing housing that takes advantage of existing infrastructure. We're a largely built out city, we're landlocked. We need to kind of look within, how can we build within our city? How can we take advantage of our infrastructure, water, sewer, roads? How can we take advantage of transit, buses, and that type of infrastructure as well? So I just wanted to kind of set the stage to let everybody know this is a really important study, but it's gonna really lead into our comprehensive planning efforts as well. So without anything further, I'm going to turn it over to the consultant team. If you all want to introduce yourselves, and I'll let you kind of take it from here. And they'll explain the format of the open house as well as dive into some really interesting information.
Well, I'll introduce our consultant team. My name is Tyler Bump. I'm a consultant with a firm called Echo Northwest. We are a planning economics firm. We're really focused on implementation. And so that's one of the things I'm really excited about working with Louisville on. Introduce our team real quick. I'll pass it over to Leanne to introduce herself, and we'll go to a little bit Simpson team after that.
Hi everyone, I'm Leanne Ryan. I'm a consultant at Northwest project management project. I used to live in Boulder, so I've been in the area in the past. And hi everyone, my name is Kelly Nowman. I'm with Simpson. We are the sub-consultants to Echo Northwest, helping out with the community engagement. So doing some facilitation of open houses and some website updates and things like that. I have talked to a couple of you already, so it's good to see you all come back. And our and our governor as well, and senior planner of local business. I just think really great.
We could give a quick overview of our activities today, the presentation, real quick, what we'll be doing after the presentation.
Yeah, so do you want to do that or you want to do? Sure. So we're going to start with a brief presentation. This will be mostly focused on kind of the key highlights and major ideas that came out of the housing needs assessment. And that'll be led by Echo Northwest. And then they'll throughout there'll be an opportunity to submit questions. And those will be through either Slido or we have some physical comment cards. If you need a comment card at any time, if you raise a hand, I can come bring over. But we do have the smartphone enabled question feature as well. We'll then kind of after a short period of answering some questions, we'll break out into specific topic areas. And we're hoping that everyone can get to provide feedback on all of the different topic areas. So we'll make an announcement every 20 minutes or so to say, hey, if you'd like to respond to every station, here's the time to rotate. But if you're having a great conversation, don't feel pressured to leave and go somewhere else. But each of the topics will be talking about housing and sustainability, some housing and character and kind of scale and visuals of housing, what we'd like to see, some ways that affordable housing can be incentivized in the community, and kind of the fiscal and use balance things. The data boards up here will help supplement that, but all of the data that's here will be brought over in the presentation. So these are just kind of as a reference for afterwards. Yes, so this will be recorded online. So yeah, everyone will be able to.
No, so it's not a hybrid meeting, it's just in person. We're going to post a recording of the presentation online. I think we should also be able to post the slides as well, so you can have those references. Yeah, but there's nobody online. Okay.
I ask two quick questions. One, when you say affordable housing, subsidized housing for purposes of this conversation is one, but I think second is, will there be some opportunity for general public comment like we do at our other public meetings, or is that?
So for the affordability piece, we're going to do breakouts and we'll go over all of the specifics about affordability. And then for comments, we'll have an opportunity for questions, and we'll submit those. but kind of, we're not gonna do like a formal, public comment period. When we go into our breakout groups, you can, kind of give comment, and we do have comment cards to submit those to the city.
I'll also just step in and say a couple things. So the first is just to make sure that for the folks who are standing, there are a couple of chairs. There's one here and then one all the way to the back one. If anyone wants to come in, it's a chair over here. So don't feel like you have to be stuck back there. And we can get more chairs as well if needed. More chairs over here. So feel free to come in. And then also, I think they'll talk about this in the presentation in a moment, but this is the first open house, the first kind of like early stages of the assessment and the plan itself. It's not an open house on a fully fledged plan.
Yeah.
So that's a separate part. This is, we're trying to get, input early on in the process. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, these will be more of like general, what the community would like to see. There's no policies, there's no specific things in place. This is the data findings have been kind of mulled over, and that's what we presented today. But there's no specific direction that the housing plan is going in yet. That's kind of what this first stage is about.
That'll also happen and facilitate some Slido for a moment, if that's okay with everybody. Yep. Okay. So this is an option or an opportunity for people during the presentation to send in your questions, and then I'll be reviewing them and then I'll give them to Tyler during the short Q&A period. As you can see, we have a lot of folks, and part of what's really the goal of tonight is to get you all into the focus groups. So we want to get your questions that are for clarifying, kind of, wait, can you say that again, or what was that? We want to get those during Q&A, and then the more substantive conversations and questions, we want to try to bring those to the focus groups. That's why we're going to sort of moderate that middle section, that Q&A a little bit. So in order to help us do that, if you wouldn't mind grabbing this QR code if you haven't already, or going to slido.com on your smartphones and then putting that in. We shouldn't see any open polls, but in a minute, we're going to grab one and do like a test, just a silly question to make sure we all know how the tech works. But if you do have any issues at all, no big deal. We do have literal pieces of paper that you're welcome to just write your questions and comments on. We can gather those. You don't have to have a smartphone, so we can make that work as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one real quick. So what is your favorite summertime activity? If you look at your phones, it should be opening up in a minute. So it's on mine. If anybody has any help, I'm happy to stop by. This is great. Okay, we're getting some people. Sleeping, Louisville Street Fair, that's very sweet. Water aerobics, outdoor concerts, eating ice cream. Okay, so I think a lot of people are getting it. Any issues right now can come in afterwards. Okay, wonderful, thank you so much. So I'm going to switch out of this just really quickly, and I'm going to open up I'm going to close this poll, this hot button issue poll. I'm going to open the next. And you all should be seeing what questions do you have. So feel free during the presentation to go ahead and put those questions in.
Okay, thank you. All right, real quick, project overview. Rob covered some of this. I want to spend most of the time today talking about our findings and the data, what a housing needs assessment is, what kind of information is in there, why does it matter? So the housing needs assessment is sort of the stage that we're at right now. We're sharing some high-level, pretty important findings from the housing needs assessment with you all. We're going to have a housing needs assessment report that's going to be available that has 50 pages of data and charts and lots of information for folks that want to dig in a little bit more. Everything is sourced, everything is replicable. So take a look at that if you would like. We have ongoing community engagement. Our partners at Logan Simpson have been having interviews, focus groups, conversations with folks already. This is one of our first big open house. We'll continue to have community engagement throughout the duration of the project. We'll have a draft housing plan. So informed by the community engagement, the open houses, the interviews, all the community feedback, informed by some of the conversations we're having today, what we see in the data, what opportunities are from a policy perspective in Louisville to help develop a draft housing plan, and the final report and recommendations coming in September this year. Sorry, start my timer to make sure it's in time. All right, housing needs assessment, what we call an HNA. What is it? So this housing needs assessment, we're going to have different sections in this report. I'm going to cover some of these data points within each of these sections today. We have a community profile, things like demographics, age, race, ethnicity, A lot of those sort of demographic conditions that are in there. What is the community profile in Louisville look like? Household incomes. We're doing a really deep dive on household incomes. One of the things that I'll show you today, there's been some intense changes in household incomes, which I think you all probably know. The data is very intense. I'm going to share that with you. Housing characteristics. What kind of housing is here today? What does it look like? What is the type of housing? Housing market trends, housing prices, rental prices, looking at the housing affordability from a market perspective. Housing affordability, so what kinds of housing are available or affordable to different kinds of households in Louisville. And it's also thinking about integrating emotional recovery by river. So ongoing coordination with the city, integrating the data, integrating the sort of tracking that's been happening with the recovery into this work as well. This chart, real quickly, this graphic on the side over here, this is something that we like to produce as part of our housing needs assessments, just to get folks to understand that housing needs are very different across an individual's life. Things change, and what we're trying to do is reflect the conditions that exist in a community for housing and how that varies depending on the diversity of households in a community. And again, these things change over time. One other note about the purpose of the housing needs assessment, besides just having a bunch of this information, I have found that the most useful part of this exercise is to have a common baseline understanding for folks in the community about what's happening. How expensive are things? What has changed? This information is an opportunity for everybody to have the same shared information about what's going on. Okay, next slide, please. So we'll dig into the community profile, some of our initial big key findings in the community profile. Slide, please. One quick note on our data sources here. So a lot of the demographic data that we're using census data. We're comparing 2 years in many cases, 2011 to 2021. And the reason that we're doing that is so that we get some idea of what's changed over time, while also understanding what's happening as current as we possibly can. So the most recent available data for the census is 2021. So that's what we're using and doing that 10-year comparison. Population here, using that census data, we're looking at a 14% change. So about 21,000 people in Louisville in 2021. It is 2023, so that number is different in real time, but this is the most recent data that we have. 14% change, so you can see the population differences. A lot of these charts and these data points that we have, we compare to other communities in Boulder County or compare to Boulder County as a whole. So you can see how does Louisville compare to Superior, how does Louisville compare to Longmont and Boulder County. Slide. Average age, one of the things that we really like to look at. So Louisville on the far right-hand side of the page or of the slide, average age in Louisville today, 2021, is 43 years old. Was 39 years old in 2011. So the community as a whole, the average is getting older. I heard some folks earlier talking about the aging population in Louisville and across the country. That's a national trend. The interesting thing is that Louisville has an older population than all the other communities in Boulder County. So just slightly older, but the same trends that are happening. I heard some folks earlier talking about aging in place, aging in neighborhood. What does that mean? What are things? That is an excellent discussion point to have at the tables today. What does aging in place look like for you all? What does aging in place in Louisville look like? Is it aging in your home? Is it aging in your community? Community can be your neighborhood. It can be a social community. What does that look like? We do a lot of work with AARP, livable communities out in Washington, D.C., doing housing policy work. So if anybody wants to talk about impacts of housing policy on aging populations, feel free to grab me at any point in time. Slide, please. Total households by tenure. So tenure, I want to define as the shared households that are either renters or owners. So do you own your house or do you rent your house? The home ownership rate in Louisville in 2021 today is 73%. So 73% of all households in Louisville are owners, which means that 27% of households are renters. Oh, sorry, that was 2011. 73% in 2011. In 2021, homeownership rate has gone down about 5%. So over the last 10 years, we're seeing a higher share of renter households. So less ownership units, more rental units. Some of that has to do with affordability. Some of that has to do with changing demographics and household income. Some of that has to do with the kind of housing that's been built over the last 10 years, whether that's rental housing or ownership housing. And so one of the things that is sort of a consistent theme I want you all to know is that there's a need for housing, there's a need for ownership housing, there's a need for rental housing across all income categories. And we'll go over that later on here as well. Please. Average household size. So this is another really interesting thing to look at. There hasn't been a ton of change in Louisville. So in 2011, average household size was 2.43 people per household. In 2021, it's 2.5. pretty consistent with the nationwide average of about 2.65 or so. But smaller average household size than Erie. Erie has the largest average household sizes of all of the communities in Boulder County that live. Change in living arrangements. So this one is really interesting, especially given the changes across the country and the world over the last 10 years, changes in affordability, and specifically some of the issues like the Marshall Fire that have impacted the Louisville communities and the Superior community, Boulder County more broadly over the last couple of years. The top line is 2011. The bottom line is 2021 here. And the sort of tealish color is the share of households that are couples with children. The orange color is couples with no children. The pinkish salmony type color is lives alone. The orangish, lightish orange color is a single parent with children, and the grayish color is lives with roommates. And so what we've seen over the last 10 years is just a little bit of a shift in living arrangements or household composition across Louisville, but a 2% increase in the amount of couples that don't have children, and a 3% decrease in the amount of couples that do have children or households of families with children. Slight changes that are happening also sort of lead through to some of the other trends that we're seeing in demographics as well. All right, household incomes. This is one of the most intense data points that I have found. So just to warn you as we get into this. Next slide, please. Before I get into household incomes, I want to talk about employment a little bit, employment in Louisville and Boulder County. 10 years ago, a lot of folks who talked about Louisville as a little bit of a bedroom community for major employment centers across Boulder County, or Denver, or other parts of the Denver metro area. Over the last 10 years, though, there's been a lot of jobs in Louisville. So this data is through 2021. I just pulled recent data about a half an hour ago. And jobs have increased. There's about 17,000 jobs, 17 to 19,000 jobs in Louisville today, where there was about 12,000 10 years ago. So there's been a lot of job growth, a lot of employment growth, which from a housing sort of sustainability jobs mix perspective is a good thing. One of the things that we really like to see is what we call a healthy jobs housing mix balance, to make sure that there's a mix of jobs, employment opportunities for residents, as well as housing opportunities in a community. So please. One quick note, this is a lot of, looks like a fairly intense chart, but what this shows is how many people come into Louisville to work, how many people leave Louisville to work in other places. There's about 15,000 people that commute out of Louisville for other jobs. The average commute time into Louisville is about 16.5 miles. Average commute distances have gone up and down over time. They are now back to what the peak was of about 10 to 12 years ago. So people are driving further to get to their jobs, or driving further to get to their housing that's more affordable from their jobs. So that's just a trend that happens in higher cost communities across the country.
15 miles considered big.
15 miles. It depends on the region that you're looking at. It's not terribly long. But the interesting thing is, the more people you have to do that distance, the more greenhouse gas emissions that you have. So there are really big, longer term sustainability and climate impacts when you have more people that are commuting longer distances, either into Louisville or out of Louisville for job opportunities. Median household income. All right, so this one is kind of crazy. So again, looking at 2011 and 2021, the median household income has increased 15% over the last 10 years. Median household income in 2011 was about $84,000. In 2021, it was about $125,000. The question earlier is, what do you mean by affordability? What is affordable housing? The thing that we use to talk about affordability is a metric that's set by Housing and Urban Development HUD, set at a countywide level. So Boulder County Housing Authority uses 100% median income that says, what is the average median income, or what is the median income for a family of four in Boulder County? 2023, that is $145,000 is median income for a family of four in Boulder County. We talk about affordability at a countywide level, and what that means. Generally, affordability is things that are below 100% again. And so anywhere between 80% area median income and 120%, we sort of talk about as workforce housing, moderate income housing, middle income housing. Below 80% is where you get into more sort of low income housing, and that's where you need to start thinking about subsidy and financial resources to help affordable housing work at the lower income. Slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to look at is there's been a big change in the median household income in Louisville. What has happened at smaller increments of household. So starting at less than $25,000, all the way up to over $200,000 household income. 2011 in the green, 2021 in the orange. Very large increase in high income households over the same period of time. Decrease in low and moderate income households. There's a number of factors that could explain this, and we started to try to look into it. One of the things could be wage increases. One of the things could be inflationary impacts and upward pressure on wages. One of the things could be that has actually come up is adult children living at home and have an extra earner, so your household income might go up if you got an adult child living at home that has a job. But this increase in 200,000 plus households indicates an in-migration, high in-migration of high income households. That's what's driving this for the most part. And a lot of that has to do with housing affordability. If you have expensive housing, your lower income, moderate income households can't afford to live here, which high income households can. And so that's the trend that's happening on the income statement. A little bit of a complicated chart, but just to show this again, increases in the high income households in Louisville compared to Boulder County. Similar trends in Boulder County, but more intense over the last 10 years. Boulder County seen an increase in high income households over that $200,000 average or median household income of 8%, 17%. Decrease in lower income, moderate income households in Louisville, more intense and more felt on the moderate income spectrum, more so than Boulder County as well. Okay, housing characteristics. Don't get on that next slide, please. One of the other things we look at is total housing units. How does population growth relate to the amount of housing that's available in the community? 11% increase in the housing units through 2021, so about 8,700 units or so in 2021. But when you account for the units, housing units that were lost, the homes that were lost during the Marshall Fire, it's a growth of only about 4.5%. So the Marshall Fire really did impact the total amount it impacted folks at an individual level at a really intense personal level, but it also impacted the overall housing availability of the total amount of housing that's available in the community. So it's really important to think about the impact of the fire on overall housing trends. Next slide, please. Housing mix, so single family detached housing, this is the share of housing by housing type in Louisville and other communities. The teal color is single family detached housing. The orange, lightish, orangish, yellowish color is flex housing, but it's anything between 1 and 4 units that's attached. Could be a duplex, could be a townhome, could be a fourplex, but anything that's not a multifamily building that's 1 to 4 units that's attached. Multifamily units in the dark orange and manufactured homes or other housing in the gray area. So Louisville has a very high share. I think most folks know of each have single family housing. One of the smallest shares of 1 to 4 units or that attached housing of all the communities in Boulder County, about 22% in multifamily. So unit type of tenure, this is another thing to look at. So how do renters and homeowners access housing, different kinds of housing types? So in Louisville, on the bottom down here, renter occupied housing, the majority of renters are in multifamily housing. And again, I want to emphasize that there's a need for rental housing and homeownership housing in Louisville and in Boulder County. Majority of renters are in multifamily housing, also a higher share than owners in that attached flex housing as well. The smallest share is single family renters. 88% of homeowners in Louisville live in detached single family housing. Smaller share, 7% of homeowners live in attached housing, again, townhouse, duplex type things, and a very small share in multifamily housing, 3% of owners in multifamily housing.
Is an ADU considered flex housing?
ADU is not counted by the census yet, so ADU, I probably should have. That's a good question. Okay, housing market trends. Talk about prices of housing. Talk about incomes, housing availability. Talk about prices of housing. Next slide, please. Average home sales price as of 3 weeks ago in Louisville, $831,000 for the average home price. And that's all ownership types. That's not just single family housing. A household would need to earn 145% of the median family income, for about $210,000 before the average sale price of a home in Louisville. Today, as of 3 weeks ago. Louisville is the dark black color, the thicker line on this chart right here. So you can see in 2012, the average home price in Louisville is about $375,000 and up to $850,000. But one really interesting thing that I want to point out here is that line has stayed very flat over the last year, where it started declining in all the other communities in Fulton County. Because of interest rate increases, because of post-COVID trends, there's been a housing depreciation. Housing prices have gone down in many communities. They've remained stable in Louisville, while they've gone down in Boulder, they've gone down in Superior, they've gone down in all the other communities in Fulton County, but they are remaining flat in Louisville. So that, to us, shows that there's really intense demand. The demand is still there. It also means that people have more resources to be able to buy those homes, especially given the higher interest rate environment that's happening right now. What's that? That does also the buyers.
What's the median price?
Median price,
Yes, the average could be very misleading. What's the median? What's the most sales? Where are the prices for the most sales?
we have the median broken down by housing type in our housing needs assessment, so when that's available. Take a look at that. We don't have it in the presentation right now. Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Given the 145% identified to afford a house now, average home price, that's automatically going to skew the income level because only those folks will be able to afford it.
That's correct. And that puts more pressure on moderate and lower income households. So that's why you see the decrease in moderate and lower income households happening at that same time. Yeah. Renter versus homeowner incomes, another thing to look at. Again, 2021 data, not 2023. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Okay, sorry, I just was looking at the median price, and it says on Redfin that the median price is $850.
So in the last 3 weeks, it's gone up $15,000.
Well, that's median, not average.
Oh, median. There you go. Median price. Yeah, there you go.
Realtor.com says 875.
There you go.
There is-
Yeah.
But it's still above whatever. you had.
Yes. And extremely high, I might add. It
Yeah.
has been going up very quickly. One note, renter versus homeowner incomes. Again, 2021 data, the most recent that we have. Renter incomes, median incomes, about $80,000. Homeowner incomes, $151,000. So almost double the household income for owner households and renter households, which means that renters generally have less of their monthly income to be able to spend on housing costs. Next slide, please. Average multifamily housing rents. The average rent per unit in Louisville today, almost $2,000 for rental in Louisville. Again, Louisville on this chart back to 2012, a 58% increase from about $1,200 in 2012 to $2,000 today. So not as much of an increase as we've seen in homeowner appreciation or homeowner changes in cost, but a big increase for renters and really enhanced renters. Renters generally are less stable. They don't have that stability of a mortgage. So they know what their site taxes. They know what their payments going to go up in.
Related to that number 1961, that's really close to the renting household, which is our subsidized, government subsidized, low income housing project here. There's shocking. And my question then would be, is Kentville still fully booked with waiting list, even if those previously be held?
We're having ongoing communications with Boulder County Housing Authority. We'll make sure to ask them that. But I will tell you that this 1961 reflects a big range of housing of unit types. So it could be studios, it could be one bedrooms. Industrial, there's more family size units, so it's going to be more affordable for those large people. So there's this unit type that's a little bit different as well. Okay, next slide. Trying to stay on time here. Cost burdening. So cost burdening, we define. Yep.
Just, real quick, it is both. Solid and people.
We're still waiting. Thank you. I thought the mic, I didn't know.
So cost burdening, rates of cost burdening for Louisville renters specifically. Cost burdening is really important for us to look at for renters specifically. On the bottom left-hand side, or the bottom of these charts right here, in 2011, about 60%, a little over 60% of households were cost burdened. That means they spend more than 30% of their household income on housing costs. At that point in time, 23% of renters were severely cost burdened. That means households spend more than 50% of their monthly income on housing costs. In 2021, this has gone down a little bit. So in this period of time, we've seen less cost burdened households. That does not mean that affordability is getting better. That means that there's less low-income households, moderate-income households in Louisville than there were in 2011. So this is a measure of affordability that we use a lot in policy. This is really intense. I will say I've never seen this level or scale of change in cost burdening going down this much as prices have been going up, which means that there's significantly fewer lower income and moderate income households in this. Okay. And then Marshall, yeah, sure.
Last question. Is there any way in this study that you are accounting for the fact that people like myself bought a house here 16 years ago, 17 years ago, I have no way to buy a house here today, and that my house is affordable simply because I'm locked into a low mortgage, and what the impact of people like our older residents in their 60s or whose affordable housing is the house that we're in. And what's gonna happen to that when those, as those people leave and age out? Like, that's a whole nother piece of our housing that, to me, looking at these numbers means, you know, it's gonna get worse.
Yep. Potentially get worse. I mean, it really, it gets to the point of like, what are the opportunities to age in place? What do you want to be doing? Do you want to stay in your neighborhood? Is there a smaller housing unit that's accessible?
Yeah,
As you-
because the way that I retire is I sell my house, like most people in that moderate income, that's where they are, and so that. I have that serious concern that we're gonna see a massive acceleration in the lack of affordability as those homes turn over, given the data that you're showing us.
I do want to point out one of the questions that somebody brought up earlier about ADU. So we've done a lot of work with ARP, and ADUs are a way that homeowners are able to age in place, access income in their primary residence. So I do want to just, there are some opportunities, some different options to be able to make that happen, to maintain that affordability. You can rent that out, you know, live in the main house. And, you know,
Yeah, because if you look at the aging, to me, that looks like another bomb in terms of housing that's gonna be really.
Yes.
How are you accounting for corporate buying that's going on? Presently, there's a trend of here where corporations buy large lots of homes.
Yep.
So is there any way we can account for that?
We're starting to look into the assessor data, so we can look at the ownership, like whether the site address matches the mailing address, the accepted data, that's for us to do it. Or if it's owned by a trust or an LLC, but that doesn't always help with the large corporation doing it, so there are ways that we look into it, but it really doesn't. One quick note, and then we'll move to questions, and we just have some conversation right after that, but the Marshall Fire Recovery, just want to note, it is an important part of what we're doing and how we're thinking about this and ongoing coordination with city staff and members of the community to talk about what that looks like. We are starting to see some trends about what Marshall Fire Recovery looks like, what housing is going into areas where the fire had occurred, what happens after that. And I think there's some really interesting policy discussions later on in this project that we'll have to talk about. What do you allow after that sort of thing? What happens after this sort of thing in a very high income, high demand, highly desirable, high quality of life place community where people want to be.
Does this include storage tech land? Because I have absolutely no idea.
Question.
Storage tech land?
Storage tech land.
Storage tech land.
So, yeah.
So-
what's going on with storage tech land?
Yeah, so there is that's right now, that's commercially zoned.
It's all.
Yeah, it's all commercially zoned. When we get into, as we go through this, next year and a half of planning, the community needs to talk about land uses. Because we're probably not going to talk about that a lot tonight, at least with the larger group, but that's a great discussion to continue having is, we have very limited land for housing development in the city. So there's these concepts of infill development, where if the city is going to build more housing, what types of housing do we need to build? Where do we build it? And then how do we align our policies at the city to ensure that we can achieve our goals? So that often includes changes to zoning in different parts of the city. I'm not talking about storage tech specifically, but as a community, we probably need to be thinking across the city, where does it make sense to have housing to align policy?
Just a point of clarification. The city doesn't build that. At all. So what we're really talking about is really the city allow housing to be built.
Right.
Which is, that term, that's not just an academic thing.
Yeah, so great clarification. Yeah, the city doesn't build housing usually. the housing authority, sometimes we partner, sometimes cities partner with developers, but that's rare. Usually the private sector builds housing. The city does, align policy and, assist with development in different ways. So we can encourage development, we can allow development. We have a city council member Lay here who always talks about setting the table for development. That's how you set the policy so that somebody might come in and build where you want them to build.
Okay, so we're gonna transition to these questions, just because some folks asked them online. So I'm just gonna start with the data questions.
Okay.
All right. So we had a question about, is there a way to ask people who don't live in Louisville yet or necessarily, but might be, what are their needs for housing?
Where's our engagement consultants? The question is there a way for people that don't live in Louisville today or don't yet to engage in this, to ask what they need for housing? There's Kelly. Did you hear the question?
No.
So the question is there a way to ask people who don't currently live in Louisville, might live in Louisville in the future, who want to, what kind of housing they need in Louisville?
Sure.
Yep.
We do have, have the option, to open it up on the website, and kind of have like more of an open communication. And open up a survey of some sort of, if you have anyone that like, direct questions to, we have that option.
But probably tough to do it data wise.
Tough to do it data wise, yes.
Okay.
We have to do it through engagement. There's no way to know.
Okay, perfect. I think that's what the question kind of led to. Okay, so any comments on, what this data says for the future? Any ideas about where the trajectory is, like if nothing's done from the housing plan perspective?
Can you speak louder and a little more enunciation your voice trails again? And I just saw it quite good.
I appreciate that so much. All right. So what's the future look like from a trajectory standpoint and from a data standpoint? Can you tell at all, if nothing's done currently, where this is going? Sort of, I think, to Councilman's question earlier as well.
The way that we talk about this, there's a cost of doing nothing. And that if you don't think about what the opportunities are, what the needs are, and how to meet those needs currently, because there's a lot of needs that healthy needs that aren't currently being met, and future needs that aren't being met. Things will continue on the trajectory that they are. You can get more expensive. Teachers, service providers, folks that provide daily services to the community will not have access to housing. That's the reality. And so the question is, from a policy perspective, from a program perspective, this housing plan, what are the ways the community wants to do housing? But the data to me is saying this will continue. We haven't seen it not continue in other places in Multnomah County. The future is unknowable, but the data tells us that things will continue.
Possible to use the microphone?
Yeah, we can, why don't you turn on the microphone?
Okay, we'll use the microphone.
Okay, so the next data related question was, how are CU students accounted for in this data?
Mostly accounted for in renter for roommate households. When we looked at the living arrangement data, most CU students, traditional students, not every student is a traditional student, shows up as in the roommate. You can look at the shared household in that roommate configuration. That's going to represent some shared of other seats.
Okay, the next question was, do you have any sense of whether some of these trends are empty nesters or whether they are people coming in without children, those family specific trends?
It's both. It's definitely both. Nationally and within the region. It's the aging thing. There's the family households that existed 10 years ago, 20 years ago are no longer family households, or they're not family households for children. And so with aging, you are getting more sort of empty nesters in primary households, a lot of times in larger housing units, frankly. And so that's one of the things that is consistently happening across the country. But also because of the income levels. There's a lot of higher income couples with no children, or multiple owners within a household, or multiple household incomes that are happening. So it's both that's happening. That is the real thunder. So yeah, it's both that's happening.
We also had a question about working from home and the impact of that on the data.
Oh, gosh, yes. It's just starting to show up in the data. So you guys see a slight increase in the work from home data. It's the first year of COVID, so it doesn't show us longer term trends. The data source that we use is called the longitudinal origin destination image data set. And it tells us where people live and where they live and how they commute to their jobs. And so we're starting to see that evolution from COVID, but it'll still be a few years until we able to show what those trends are longer term data.
Okay, and then can you let us know what the source of the income data was?
It's yes, 5-year estimate from the US. Yeah, they're 5-year estimates. So 2021 is the year that we're using, but because of the size of the community, we will still to reduce the margin of error, we use 5-year estimates. So the 5-year estimate is represented. It's the same, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, can you reiterate what it means to be lower than 80% NFI?
Oh, that's a really concept. Okay, so MFI, median family income, also sometimes referred to as area median income. We use them mostly interchangeably, they're very close, but ignore that for a second. It's calculated on the number of people per house. So when I said 100% median family income, that was for a family of 4. If you're a 2-person household with a single person household, that's going to be lower, just because your cost of housing and living is like lower than smaller houses. So that's set at 100%. 100% is sort of what's the threshold that's again used by HUD, and it is used to allocate federal funding for affordable housing, CDBG grants, home funding, other federal programs. If you're less than 100%, that means you're the share of what we. So 80% median family income for 4-person household, you make 80% what we need for a 4-person household. Generally, when we talk about affordable housing, when we talk about it from a policy perspective, is usually about 60% median family income below. And then a 60% to 100% range is what we usually call workforce housing, middle income housing, moderate income housing. But in Louisville, moderate income housing is also extremely scarce. And so one of the things to think about is the needs across all income categories, when both low income households and moderate income households.
Okay, what are ADUs?
Yes, accessory dwelling units, and accessory dwelling units, I don't like the term, but many folks are familiar with casitas in the Southwest. Granny flats, they historically called smaller secondary housing units that are accessory to the primary structure. So if you have a single family house, an accessory dwelling unit might be 600 square foot, 1-bedroom unit as a backyard. That's accessory dwelling units are usually built by homeowners, like I mentioned, for the aging in place questions, but it provides an opportunity for homeowners to build housing essentially in the backyard.
Okay, so how has COVID impacted this data?
Really giving you shit. Again, 2021, so it's sort of early COVID. I think the thing that we're trying to collect as much recent data as we can from the most accurate data. What we're seeing for Louisville specifically, and I think that flat line, the Louisville housing crisis and everything else is sort of trending down, means that COVID trends are remaining. People are continuing to want to move. The demand stays high. There was the sort of boomtown trend of people moving to high quality life, housing communities during COVID. I don't think that will slow down for most of the yeah, it's a very nice place, but all live here for a reason. We live here for a reason. I think that will continue. The interesting thing for me on the COVID side, post-COVID side, is on the employment. So employment has grown very quickly post-COVID, where it hasn't grown quickly So that again, makes me think that there's more interest in economic growth. A lot of the folks that are moving here are starting businesses, a lot of those businesses are going to hire. And so that employment growth is new, frankly, at the rate that's happening for Louisville, and I think is a post-COVID trend, but again, early indication, that's to see that happening.
Will the housing plan consider people who are currently experiencing?
Great questions tonight.
Like, with the rain, it's loud.
Then, you know,
I know it's not a little bit.
will the housing plan account for individuals that are experiencing homelessness? The houseless community is the hardest to understand what's happening. We do use point in time counts, which is the best data source that we have. So we do have data that we'll be able to use. We know that data under counts is happening for homeless individuals in the community. One of the things that we like to do is talk to school districts what's happening with kids in schools, and we do letters what's happening that way. So yes, we will account for it. It's just really hard to measure and do the best job.
Okay, is there any data on how many units have been converted to short-term rentals, so specifically under 30 days?
Yes, that's a good question.
Some indication of short-term rentals in the, so we can see what share of vacant units. But we have some level of indication. Not as recent.
We have to repeat that from the, we have some data. Short-term rentals again are very hard for us to account for in the data, because so many of them do fly under the radar, right? It's short-term rentals. There are data sources that we use. We do account for it in the housing units that will be reported, but that's data that we have. But to be able to understand the share of housing units that are short-term rentals of full housing stock.
If I could just add, that currently, so everybody knows, the city code does not allow short-term rental, which is defined as rental for less than a month. So we know there's some out there under the radar a little bit, that's something that can affect housing affordability, but currently our ordinances don't allow it.
In most places that we work, while that is happening and it does impact longer term housing affordability for both renters and owners, it's usually not happening, especially in communities that don't allow it at a rate that's impacting the overall housing availability, given the full stock of housing. Can be a problem, but also not usually as big of a problem as folks might think it is, depending on the city.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you 2 questions here. So any comment on the margin of error for the data? And then the second question is, are you gonna be able to incorporate anything more recent than 2021?
2021 is the most recent data that we can use that's available from the census for most of the demographic data. Anytime we are able to use more recent current data, we do. So that sale price data, the rental data, employment data, anything that we can use that's more current that has a low margin of error, we use. In the housing needs assessment, there will be some documentation of margin of error across all the data attributes. There will usually be a line across all of those charts that shows the margin of error relative to that. The reason again that we use the 5-year estimates is so that we have as low of a margin of error as possible. Louisville is a small community. The census is survey data. It's good, but there is a margin of error, and we're using best data that we can to have the smallest margin of error possible.
I don't want to speak for Rob, but by the time you're doing your comprehensive plan update, you might have access to 2022. I think it comes out in December this year, I think. So depending on where you are, that project might have better data later on.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more data question, and then I'll give a brief summary of the topics that have come up that haven't been data specific questions, and then I think it's about time for us to transition to the next step. So I just want to let you know we are hearing all those broader questions that also got read up. So the last data specific question was, is there any way to quantify the number of owner occupied homes that have been sold and converted to rentals?
It's very difficult to do that. There are ways to do it again using assessor data, but it's very difficult to do. If it's something that folks think is worth us looking into. We can look into it. To me, seeing the increasing share of renter households over the last 10 years indicates that there has been some shifting of housing units that used to be homeownership, but they're not rental, but not a ton, because you've seen more rental units be built in the last 10 years. So it is happening, really hard for us to figure out. There is data, but it's hard for us to figure that out.
Okay, great. So I just want to say there are many more here. We have a record of all your questions, some of which I think are getting into the things that we definitely should think about area, which is really helpful. But so some things that have come up are, why are we doing this project now? Which I think Rob touched on a little bit. If you have more questions about anything about the process or where we are in the process or why we're doing it now, not in the future, not in the past, Rob is a great resource and I am happy to try to help you through those questions as well. We also had some questions about what the meaning of DEI is. It stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Happy to talk to anybody about that as well. Also goes by EDI, but I just want to give the actual words for that acronym. And then some other things are, ideas about how to engage developers, property owners, how this intersects with the Old Town overlay that's specific to our Old Town neighborhood here in the downtown area. I'm sure you're familiar with that. We got questions about the impacts on infrastructure, about the cost to the community of housing or unaffordable housing. So we've got all those questions and those are great to bring to the focus groups. I'm sorry we didn't get to literally everyone's question, but thank you so much for going through the slide with us. I think it helped us to get through as many questions as we could. So I'll turn it back over to you all to do the next step.
Okay, so, right now,